President Akufo-Addo says the $2 billion Sinohydro transaction will allow Ghana to have access to a large sum of money which will not burden its debt profile. Addressing Chinese government officials during his visit to China, he explained that Ghana is looking at this transaction to afford the opportunity to expand and improve road infrastructure as well as the railway development of the country.
Very determined on this Sinohydro arrangement, and we're counting on you in the way in which you worked with Bowie Dam, with high quality work, that will also be a feature of the arrangements that we're making with Sinohydro. And therefore Ghana too is very keen on providing as much support as possible to make the Sinohydro arrangement come on stream quickly. My understanding is that the agreement that was signed this morning with the Sinohydro agreement, with the signing of the agreements this afternoon that we're going to do here, will complete virtually the entire group of documentation that was required to get the Sinohydro transaction on the way. There's great expectation in Ghana about the benefits of the Sinohydro transaction. It is my hope and expectation that when we conclude the signing this afternoon, the way will be open for the Sinohydro to get on site in Ghana and begin the process of delivery under the agreement. A lot of trust has been built between Ghana and Power China, and so, but the $2 billion transaction, which is involved in the Sinohydro transaction, we're looking to increase it even more. And that's why I'm saying that as president, I'm expecting that we'll have even more than before. I'm satisfied about the capacity to do it, and we will have all the support that you need from the government of Ghana.
So the president, who has been in China to try to get some investment opportunities for Ghana, has already signed 8 cooperation agreements and memoranda of understanding in different sectors of their respective economies. President Akufo-Addo has also hinted of plans to float a $50 billion century bond, said to be the biggest ever bond the country is going for. This, he said, will provide resources to finance our infrastructure and industrial development, and noted that at some stage China will interest itself and take a part of it as her contribution to Ghana's development. These are really interesting developments, but not without some related questions to be answered. And with me to do just that is Sino-Africa expert Paul Frimpong to tell us some more. Now, Paul, you're welcome to the market, please.
Thank you.
So before we go into the specifics like the Sinohydro and the $50 billion and so on, what do you consider to be the level of interest that Ghana has taken in China and vice versa in recent times?
Yeah, definitely with this scenario, we're looking at the broader discussion happening around China and its role in Africa. For over the last 2-3 decades, we've seen a considerable amount of interest of China in Africa and vice versa. So for over a decade now, we've seen that China has risen to become the largest trading partner of Africa, surpassing the US and the European Union. In this respect, you know that China is relying on African economies for so many resources.
Exactly.
Likewise, African economies are also relying on China for physical evidence in terms of infrastructure development in certain sectors. So obviously, we've seen that in the last couple of years, Ghana has also, raised its interest in China. Even the current administration, we've seen in the first step, we saw the vice president visiting China when they just came into power.
Exactly.
And this has followed with the current situation that we have at our hand, where we have the president in China. Actually, because of the FOCA, the Forum for China-African Cooperation, which is held every 3 years. So the forum itself started today. So today and then tomorrow, that's when the forum will happen. But then you realize that every economy represented by its government, its president, has their own agenda. Obviously, we've had a lot of debates about how Africa is positioning itself with respect to the agreements and the deals that they're having with China. Because here's the case, we have the example of the Western model that we followed, where we got to a point where most economies in Africa fell into debt, that they have to even go under HIPIC, which happened in Ghana in the 2000s, before we were forgiving the debt that we owe some of these economies.
You don't find anything worrying about the fact that we are kind of refocusing our attention on China apart from the Western world?
I don't see it as a challenge. Obviously, we are looking at where we can get the best deal from.
Okay.
It's established fact that we need partners to develop to transform our economies. Obviously, what these economies have achieved, I mean, the West and the East China have achieved is a tremendous thing that we can learn from.
Okay.
They have the resources in terms of monetary resources. They have the capacity in terms of technical support, technological transfer, and everything there that we can use to leapfrog from where we are to the next phase of our development. But of course, the question is, how do you deal with these superpowers?
Exactly.
I'm looking at your tiny economy. Here's the case. Most of these economies are going to China, 1 point something billion people with your 28, 29 million people. Some of the companies are as small as 2 million people, 3 million people, and you are sitting on the table, and the next person sitting in front of you has 1.3 billion people to negotiate with you. So we have a little bit of challenges as to how economies will make sure they will not fall into the trap that they fell in some years ago when we're dealing with the West.
All right, so let's move on. We don't have much time, but I would like to look at the deal, the Sinohydro deal, which has been signed and for which the president made some interesting comments on. Now, are we getting the best of deals with this transaction?
Well, obviously, we've seen that China and it has their own rhetoric in terms of how they are dealing with African economy. So instead of, they are choosing the physical evidence approach, okay, to find and build relationship with economies in Africa. Obviously, it's a barter system. They are in for something, okay, whether it's a mining resource that you will give to them, concession that they will mine for a period to cater for the money that you own them. So their approach is very simple. They say that, okay, we are not going to interfere politically in your economy. They are not interested in this diplomatic, conversation. What they are interested in is the physical evidence. Okay, so you need this road to be constructed. I'm going to construct this road for you. Okay, so it's up to the government to make sure they have a plan as to what they want to do with the government of China. So, for example, I'm sure the one district, one factory is such a major blueprint that if an economy has such a project, okay, you can put in front of your development partners. This will bring physical evidence, physical results, because then you're not sitting in front of them without having any vision, allow them to come and do anything in your economy.
Okay.
Guys, this is what we want for the next 10 years, for the next 15 years. So in order for us to do business with you, in order to trade with you, these are the areas we need your support, and that's where the hydropower deal falls under. So it's a whole blueprint that the government has, that, okay, this and this and what we want to do in the economy under one district, one factory. So
and such blueprints definitely will involve, environmental,
definitely. Because of course we had a situation where the illegal mining issues happened in the recent past, where it affected the surrounding communities with respect to water bodies and what have you. Obviously, I'm sure and I'm very positive that under some of these initiatives, like one district, one factory, all these measures have been taken into consideration. Because if not, then you just open your arms wide. Okay, China is big, they can swallow you. So you need to make sure that, okay, this is what we want. Like we've seen, this is the next time we are approaching them, we have a blueprint. In the past, how we were dealing with the Western economies, we had no blueprint. So they come in, assess the economy and say, okay, this is what we want to do for you. But this time around, we have our own blueprint. I thought of that is just a bonus.
So we definitely will come again on this particular topic. But in 30 seconds, what do you think about the $50 billion bond, century bond that has been?
I'm thinking that it's very ambitious, of course, because I don't think we've ever dreamt of floating such a huge amount of bond, and it's a century bond, right? So for me, I don't anticipate it happening now. Obviously, the discussion will happen if in the next couple of years before something of that sort can happen. But we need to understand how the impact of such debt will have on the entire economy. Do we have the capacity to be able to pay for those bonds in the time that they are maturing? We need to think deeper before we can float such a bond. So I'm sure it's going to be a long discussion before something of that sort can happen in the economy.
Thank you very much for your time, Paul Frimpong. And Paul Frimpong is a Sino-Africa expert. He's been talking about current developments between Ghana and China.